Now, while the Nubian queens seem to be champions in defense, defending their homeland against Roman invasion, Nubian kings seem to be pretty good at offense. I guess it was a collective effort. What up, African world? It's your boy Home Team, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And today I want to talk about the Kushite Empire and the African Renaissance. When we think of Kush, we tend to think of getting high, having the munchies, or jail time. Unfortunately, in our modern times, we seldom associate Kush with Africa. However, the Kushite Empire of the 25th dynasty was definitely one of the greatest days in African history. Now, if you thought Kush was interesting, the indigenous name of the region might pique your interest as well, because apparently these Kushites called their kingdom Cash. And with names like Kush and Cash, it was inevitable that these people were going to build a great empire. However, there is some confusion when it comes to the term Nubia. The name Nubia is just a general collective term for the region below Egypt. There were many Nubian city-states. Think of it like this. Nubia was kind of like California, and Kush was like Los Angeles. And there were many other Nubian kingdoms or cities. Among these Nubian kingdoms, Kush seemed to be the most popular and the one with the highest ambition. I'm just playing. But these Kushites were pretty amazing. The Kushites' claim to fame was when they expanded their kingdom into an empire under King Piye. The reasons behind the Kushite expansion is no doubt one of the most unique things of not only African history, but world history. You see, in Kush, all the rulers were regarded as being the guardians of the state religion, preserving and maintaining the religious worldview. And during the Kushite invasion, Egypt was perceived to be as being out of proper religious or spiritual alignment. So the question is, why would these Kushites care so much about the religiosity in Egypt? To answer this question, we must understand the history behind Egyptian religion and culture. People tend to look at Egypt as one of the most ancient places in ancient Africa. But in reality, the religion and culture of the Egyptians was happening in the region of Nubia long before Egypt came about. The Greeks themselves even told us this. Diogenes Siculus believed that the Nubians were one of the most ancient people on the planet. And this is pretty much what he had to say about the Nubians. He said, and I quote, "The Ethiopians say that the Egyptians are one of their colonies, which was brought into Egypt by Osiris. They even allege that this country was originally underwater, but that the Nile, dragging much mud as it flowed from Ethiopia, had finally filled it in and made it a part of the continent. They add that from them, as from their authors and ancestors, the Egyptians get most of their laws. It is from them that the Egyptians have learned to honor kings as gods and bury them with such pomp. Sculpture and writing were invented by the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians cite evidence that they are more ancient than the Egyptians, but it is useless to report that here." So Diogenes is pretty much saying, hey, look, I don't really have any solid evidence of this, but these are what these Nubians are telling me. They're saying that their religion and their culture is more ancient than Egypt. It's also interesting to note that North Africa was indeed underwater at one point in time, and the water actually receded over time. So essentially, we're given a perspective of the minds of these Nubian kings concerning Egypt. These Nubians knew that the religion and the culture of Egypt came from them, so they were willing to take whatever measures possible to preserve it, hinting at their cultural connection. And this is exactly the mindset King Piye of Kush had when he expanded into Egypt. King Piye himself said in his victory cellar that he pretty much invaded Egypt because the Egyptians were rebelling against traditional religious beliefs. He literally said that his expansion into Egypt was, and I quote, a holy war. And he even told his army to cleanse themselves in a river in preparation for battle. You see, the Kushite Empire is pretty much known as the African Renaissance. because all the Kushite kings not only participated in the restoration of traditional Egyptian practices and beliefs, but they reaffirmed and imposed Kushite culture in Egypt. The religious and cultural restoration of Egypt by these Kushites is very unique, because conquerors never come in and actually restore the culture, but they destroy it. In the minds of these Kushite kings, the connection between Nubia and Egypt is ancient and important. The relationship between Nubia and Egypt is kind of like the relationship between England and America, Nubia being England. As evidence of his religious and cultural reasons for invading Egypt, King Piye actually sailed back to Nubia, forgave his enemies, and restored temples in Egypt after he was victorious. The dude didn't even stay in Egypt, and he seemed surprisingly lax in requiring tribute from them. And to preserve and maintain Kushite practices in Egypt, he appointed his sister Amenoritis as high priestess of Amun in Egypt. Nubia is known for its matrilineal system, so a woman being the high priestess wasn't out of the norm, way ahead of their time. King Piye actually revived one of the greatest features in the Old and Middle Kingdoms, which was pyramid building. He was very passionate about the worship of the god Amun, and even rebuilt his temple. Scholars like Geoff Emberling actually believe that King Piye originated the largest empire in Africa during this time. King Piye used his navy very strategically to conquer Memphis in particular. It's believed that King Piye reigned for about 30 or 35 years. Apparently, King Piye loved horses, and when he visited the stable of a defeated Egyptian king and saw the horses were dying of starvation, he was deeply troubled by it, so much so that he even wrote about it in his victory stela. And he was even buried in his pyramid with 4 of his favorite horses. The legacy of the Kushite Empire extends even outside of Africa. It holds a very important place in African history due to the restoration of traditional Nubian and Egyptian values, art, culture, and even architecture. It was probably the last grand renaissance in African history, which likely influenced Greek visitors. Even Herodotus claimed that the Nubians might be the most ancient people, and that Egypt was founded from them. Herodotus even alleged that the Greek gods originated in Nubia. Perhaps this is why the Kushite kings like King Piye, Shabaka, Shabiku, and Taharka were so dedicated in restoring their religious traditions in Egypt. But yo, I'm all out, guys. It's your boy Home Team. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.
For to hear the young birds singing and the lambs to sport